The Giants, they were coming off a season where they exceeded their own expectations. They overexceeded, in other words, by making the playoffs with a pretty flawed roster, and they're going into 2023 with the expectation of, well, trying to do it again. And they made an interesting choice in this offseason during this point last year, because they had to come to make a decision between the two key players. Daniel Jones at quarterback, Saquon Barkley at running back. They had to make a decision on, well, which one do we give the big fat contract to? So they made that interesting decision to give that big fat contract to Daniel Jones. And then they decided to franchise tag running back Saquon Barkley. Franchise tag him. So then after, they had themselves what I thought was a good draft, and by need. So basically drafting the best available player. So going in, I thought the Giants would have themselves a solid season, just as long as they could get the same Daniel Jones they got in 2022, minus the turnovers. Unfortunately, the season for the New York Giants in 2023, it went south from the very beginning. Like literally just minutes into week 1. They got their butts whooped. Actually, not just whooped by the Dallas Cowboys in the opener, but completely blanketed, embarrassed, soaked in the rain on prime time. You saw an opening drive filled with some promise and a complete disaster. False start by the offensive line. Botched snap by the center that led to a big sack. And then you have Graham Gano trying to make a field goal in the rain, and then it gets blocked and get returned for a big touchdown. That set the tone for what ended up becoming the center of the many, many problems for Big Blue all season long. They got shut out, and sure, they get a comeback win over Arizona in week 2, but it doesn't get any better. It didn't fix the problems that the Giants had going forward. And one of those problems was the horrific, the absolutely shitty offensive line. The pass blocking was so bad, they averaged 6 or more sacks per game. Like, whoever was at quarterback, they had no time to throw. They were under duress all day long. The poor pass protection led to heavy pressure on Daniel Jones in the pocket and forced him to run for his life when he didn't need to. I think it was the same case it was in 2022, just amped up to the max. But it also led to more turnovers, some of which led to touchdowns, like in the week 1 game. And it only got worse as the season wore on, with injuries, including to their quarterback. So at one point, Daniel Jones got injured, but actually let's reverse course. Daniel Jones was inconsistent, and he was eventually gone. And why do I say gone? Well, let's first start with why Daniel Jones was inconsistent, actually. Even with the small amount of protection time that Daniel Jones got, Daniel Jones was, again, inconsistent. He couldn't connect with either of his receiving core, and even without pressure in his face, still turned it over, like dead in the right to a corner, linebacker, whatnot. He made wrong reads in general. So why do I say he was gone? Well, he suffered a neck injury in that Miami game. And then when he came back for the Raiders, he was gone permanently for the season with a torn ACL on a non-contact run. So a very rough way for Daniel Jones' season to end early, but he regressed. And it gave New York some reason to go and get another quarterback, potentially this offseason. So you had a door of quarterbacks like Tyrod Taylor and Danny DeVito. And Danny DeVito, surprisingly, had this whole spotlight on him. Like, oh, he's like Tommy DeVito. No, he wasn't really. But then it was just like for 1 week. And then it went to Tyrod Taylor. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it for the Giants quarterback. But nonetheless, Daniel Jones was just like, oof. But for all of Big Blue's problems, when you look at what went right for the Giants, you look at Dexter Lawrence. The defense, yes, it was atrocious as hell. But when you look at a bright spot on this defense, Dexter Lawrence was a force to be reckoned with at defensive tackle. He was a freaking force at pressure, getting to the quarterback, in tackling in short distances, including his standout game against the Jets in Week 8. He finished the season as an All-Pro and as a Pro Bowler with 4.5 sacks, 7 tackles for loss, and overall 32 tackles. So pretty impressive stuff for Dexter Lawrence. And, stats alone, Stats beside, he was a very effective player for that defense, which was, again, pretty terrible. And then you look at the wins. Yes, most of them came against crappy teams, but 2 of those wins were actually very surprising and kind of impressive, if you ask me. If there were any highlight wins in their 6 injury-riddled wins this season, you look at the wins over the Packers on Monday night and then the Eagles to close out the season. The Giants defense had Jordan Love and Jalen Hurts on lock. And yeah, the quarterbacks didn't have impressive performances, but Tommy DeVito against the Packers and Tyrod Taylor against Philadelphia, they did enough to pull away on offense, put the game out of reach for their team, especially DeVito leading a game-winning drive against the Packers and then get that game-winning field goal for his kicker. And then Tyrod Taylor, of course, helping his team pull away late, doing just enough. So, yeah, it was 2 good wins against 2 eventual playoff teams, especially the Eagles. They haven't gotten a win against them in forever. And then it also locked them into the 5th seed where they went on to lose in the playoffs. So they ended the season 6-11, and even if injuries eventually did them in, they were doomed from the start, with so many major flaws across the board, but none bigger than that horrifically bad offensive line that got their quarterback injured for a few games, and then Daniel Jones was eventually lost for the season with that freak ACL injury. So now they go into 2024 with many questions, the answers on that same side of the ball. So when you look at their offseason, they have about $35 million in cap space to spend. Decent amount of money, but not a lot that they can really do anything. So they got to spend it wisely unless they make some moves to get even more money. They do pick at number 6 overall. So, hey, something to spend. Make a decision at what you want to do, whether it be a lineman or receiver. I don't know. Whatever you want to pick. Look at some of the key free agents. Obviously, the one at the top of the list is Saquon Barkley. We'll talk more about him in a bit. But some of your other key free agents is corner Adoree Jackson, safety Xavier McKinley, and receiver Sterling Shepard. Maybe Adoree Jackson and Xavier McKinley are 2 names that you should consider re-signing if you're the Giants. Looking at some of the needs to address this coming offseason, which is in a couple weeks, the number one thing that they should address is that offensive line, because Brian Daboll and Joe Chosen, the head coach and GM duo, they cannot go into 2024 expecting Daniel Jones or whoever's going to be at quarterback to get sacked more than 5 times per game again. If they do that, it is atrocious. That is a fireable offense. Their main priority of both this free agency and the draft should be upgrading the guard, the center, the right tackle spots, and provide their quarterback ample protection to throw that ball. And if protection breaks down, like in more than 10 seconds, then okay, then you can run. But the main priority is getting whoever's going to be at quarterback absolute protection. And then you got to decide what you got to do with Saquon Barkley. Their top running back is an upcoming free agent. They're not going to franchise tag him because it's going to be too expensive. So they have to decide if you want to commit to Saquon Barkley long term or if you're going to go in a different direction. And they got to make the decision real soon. And this is probably not going to happen, but I would consider, if you're the Giants, grabbing a young quarterback to compete with Daniel Jones. While it wasn't necessarily Jones' fault for the Giants' struggle in 2023, I mean, he didn't necessarily move the needle either. He still has his glaring flaws, such as reading defenses, turning the ball over frequently, and he's also coming off a torn ACL injury that happened midway through the season. Like, not like very late in the season, but still, like, it's a pretty significant injury. So rather than adding a veteran, maybe consider signing or drafting a younger quarterback that can compete with Daniel Jones. Because, yeah, if I was Daniel Jones, I'd be on the lookout of how the Giants could handle that quarterback position going forward. So for the Giants, it was a disappointing yet kind of expected follow-up to their surprising 2022 campaign. So because of injuries and various flaws. However, they're going to have to make some serious changes and considerations on the offensive side of the ball if they want to compete this September, because the NFC East, which is held by the Cowboys and the Eagles, obviously it's gonna be tough. But if they want to take at least themselves seriously first, they gotta look at the offensive side of the ball and say, hey, we need to do something.